Hello and welcome to this Q&A about intermittent fasting. It's a very relevant topic. I think every other person, be it those who come for consultations for other reasons, or even people who I meet out in the street, ask about intermittent fasting. And to discuss this topic today, we have with us Professor Godfrey Grech, who is a molecular biologist and a lecturer and researcher at the University of Malta. His areas of interest when it comes to research include molecular oncology, biomarkers, cancer diagnosis and research, and molecular pathology. What is fascinating about this topic, this discussion that we're going to have today, is that a lot of us know that intermittent fasting is good, it has benefits, it's been used for centuries, and especially in countries where longevity is prevalent, fasting in some way or another is part of the culture. But what happens and how the mechanisms are in place for the benefits to come out is not something that we are often aware of, and we would be discussing exactly that today. So I'm going to start with the first question. What is intermittent fasting?
Okay, so in terms of a definition, is that in any one type, you will have a time, a specific time that you don't provide food, okay, as a definition. But in terms of the scientific part of that is that you stop glucose, yeah, for a period of time. Now, that period of time always depends, of course, on the activity of the individual. So it's not that period of time, it's not always a standard thing. So if somebody is doing a lot of exercise or somebody is sedentary, this period of time, of course, it's not the same. And that's why
Yes.
all this fasting should be done in liaison with a nutritionist, all right? So that we will identify that specific time period. But in general, it is a 12-hour period, more than 12-hour
More than
period.
12 hours, so 12 hours would be the cutoff point where the benefits of the fasting would start being noticeable.
Exactly. And soon we explain why, because of the change
Yes,
of the metabolism. Yeah.
yes. And usually the recommendation is 16 hours of fasting and 8 hours of eating. But as you are saying, it can be either closer to 12 hours, or maybe in certain cases it can be extended a little bit more. What I feel that if someone goes overboard and they fast too much, maybe they eat once a day, it will affect their metabolism, it will slow it down. So sometimes it has to be done with caution as well. And interestingly, you had mentioned how long you should do the fasting for. In fact, a lot of people do fasting long term as part of their normal daily routine. Um, what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, now we're talking not about the length of the time of the fasting, but how long the
The
fasting
duration of
process is going to happen. Yeah.
exactly.
So fasting has a lot of advantages, okay, and a lot of health benefits that we will discuss in a second. Uh, but it also has some disadvantages. Also because there's the shift in the metabolism, and that would mean that we're moving from having a fuel, which is glucose, into acetate or 3-HBs, or which are the hydroxybutyrates. And that's because that shift is prolonged in terms of the number of days you fast, okay? Um, then there's also some disadvantages, including constipation, increase and spiking of cholesterol for a long time. So there are various disadvantages. So it's good to do it like you say, like you do a 2-month fasting as a process, and then you move on to a varied.
You would recommend doing fasting maybe for about 2, maybe 3 months maximum, and then going back to eating in the normal patterns rather than
Yeah,
fasting throughout.
yeah. Go back to a healthy diet
Yes,
always.
and it is
But
restrictive
also,
as well, because sometimes even when one has to cope with their social activities, for example, with their timetable, it's quite restrictive in that regard. Now, you mentioned the health benefits of fasting. Maybe you can go into more details about what happens while we are fasting, why it is so beneficial to our body.
okay, so one of the main advantages of intermittent fasting is you will have less inflammation. Now, of course, we need the fuel, yeah, so that the cell has the energy because we need energy. Okay. Now, in terms of a cellular context, okay, so there is the powerhouses, yeah, to produce the energy. We call those mitochondria. Okay. Now, so fasting helps the mitochondria to to sort of rest for sometimes have homeostasis and then restart. Okay, and when you get and this is because we shift the energy source. We shift the energy source from glucose, which will provide specific chemicals, and then we turn the wheel in the powerhouses. Okay, and then we produce the energy because we fast more than 12 hours. And here, the 12 hours, I'm taking it as a general for somebody who was not, of course, doing a lot of exercise, or athletes are a
There are some
different
contraindications.
situation.
In fact, we can look into the contraindications as well later
Exactly.
on.
So then we shift into actually. So what happens is in the first part, if you don't have glucose, if you don't put in glucose, then you shift to glycogen, which is I call it the refrigerator, the store, yeah, as a refrigerator. So the first one that you go and open. But if something finishes from the refrigerator, then you go to the freezer to get it out of the
Yes,
freezer. The freezer
that's our fat,
is
our
the fat.
visceral fat, right?
Exactly. So this
Mhm.
this is one way how to look at it, all right?
Yes.
And therefore we need to replenish ourselves, and we go to actually utilizing fat as a source of energy.
Hmm.
That's a different process,
Hmm.
and actually the final outcome, all right, is actually using acetate, and we call those ketones, and that's why we
Hmm.
call it ketosis. So we shift into
Yes.
the metabolism of ketosis.
Yes, in fact, a lot of people follow the ketogenic diet without going into the pros and cons of it, when in fact you can bring about the same effect of ketosis through fasting without being so restrictive, because a restrictive diet is never beneficial. Without restricting what you are eating when it comes to food groups, you can still do ketosis in a different way through fasting. And in fact, you mentioned burning fat. Um, uh, Fasting has a lot of benefits as well on our metabolism when it comes to risks, for example, for diabetes and high blood pressure because of this burning of the visceral fat. Maybe you can go into more detail about what it does to our organs while we are fasting, how they benefit. You mentioned the mitochondria.
Yeah, so when the mitochondria are so these are the powerhouses, okay, of the cells. Let's put them like that. And when they are working for a long time and massively, they start producing various health, um, um, not promoting health. I mean, like reactive oxygen species
Mhm.
and things that
Which
in,
bring about damage to our body,
exactly,
including
bring about
cancer.
damage and
Mhm.
inflammation. And so actually there is a very direct link between what we call a specific inflammasome, which is an inflammation, which is driven by mitochondrial um, um, overuse. Okay.
Which we do in
And
reality in our westernized diet. We're always stimulating
exactly.
our body by eating constantly.
Exactly. And this also results in increase in insulin all the time, no? So you mentioned, for instance, diabetes. Yes, it becomes a pre-diabetic condition because you have the insulin always up. During fasting, insulin will go down, inflammation is going down. And this is also interesting to mention that how to break the fast. Okay? Don't
Mhm.
don't break the fast with and indulge yourself in fats. Okay? So,
Yes,
so these are
some people will be craving a certain food and they say, I'm going to eat that as soon as I come out of the fat, which is quite counterproductive.
it is because you induce a huge inflammatory response immediately.
Yes, and the
You know?
surge of insulin as well, if it is a high carbohydrate meal.
Exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
So I know you fast, it's true, but then breaking the fast should be staggered sort of slowly. Okay, and also of course the meals not to indulge too much, and eat also
Yes.
a healthy
Yes, in
diet.
fact, there is a myth that if you do fast, you can eat whatever you want during the non-fasting period. And as you said, it is not real because obviously the calories that you are consuming and the fats will still cause damage, even though they are done in that context. Now, when we are fasting, what shouldn't we consume and what should we consume or what can we consume? Because these are especially when it comes to tea lovers, they're a common question with tea with milk, especially.
I mean, the main objective of fasting is to switch off a bit the glucose, okay, so that you don't have glycolysis. And then you use your glycogen stores quickly, and then you move into the lipolysis pathway. Okay, so it's shifting. So it's important not to put in any glucose. It's important to tell you as well. You might tell me protein is not glucose, but putting in protein is actually providing amino acids, and these building blocks can also be converted to glucose. So
Mhm.
we have to really pay attention to what we are doing. I mean, so even you mentioned other diets before, okay? So protein can also produce glucose to fire
Energy.
our energy.
Mhm.
We shouldn't eat any kind of carbohydrates, definitely during the
And that
fasting, of
includes
course.
milk as well, because it does contain
Yes, well,
carbohydrates too.
it's made of
Some people
carbohydrates and
take
fats. I
tea in
mean,
between to to keep
exactly.
going.
No milk. Um, um, and there is also some kind of somebody is taking most probably will mention this later, but somebody taking some medication also. If the medication has some sugar coating, it's better to set it up in a specific timing.
So they can take the medication during a time when they are not fasting. Now, what can we have while we are fasting, for example? What is okay? What is allowed during the fasting window?
Well, things that normally I don't promote, like coffee, um,
It's an appetite suppressant, so in
like coffee,
reality, it can help a bit to make it
to do it smoother, to make it
Yes,
smoother.
but too much is
Um,
obviously harmful.
Of course, not to get dehydrated. Of course, you need to
Mhm.
consume water, so that's no. So
And I
anything
believe you
without
have to drink
calories,
more water as well while you are fasting.
yeah, it's
Hmm
important because you will dehydrate. Um,
hmm
and um, anything which doesn't have any glucose in, and
hmm
not only glucose, sorry, any carbohydrates.
hmm
And you mentioned milk. Milk is full of carbohydrates and
hmm
fat, of
That's
course.
it. So best it would
So
be to have maybe some infusions, like herbal infusions without,
yeah,
or say some maybe green tea or water or a little bit of coffee sometimes.
yes, zero
Now you
calorie.
mentioned, yes, you mentioned who should not fast or maybe when it is not ideal to fast.
Athletes is the first one that comes to
Mhm.
mind. So at least athletes would not need to fast because they
No.
they they need all the energy.
And their
Uh,
body is in high demand of energy, so they cannot afford
for,
to miss
of
out
course,
on meal times.
exactly. And then there are people who are on specific medications. For instance, it's very difficult to fast, or at least they have to fast in liaison with the medical
Hmm In fact,
practitioner.
I'm thinking people who are diabetic, who are on sugar lowering
That's
drugs,
very
might have
dangerous.
hypoglycemia during the time of fasting, so it's contraindicated.
That-
And another group that comes to mind might be those who are suffering acutely. So at that time, they're suffering from acid reflux and problems with their stomach, because if they go for long hours without eating, it might make their symptoms worse. But once they come out of it, they can still fast. I invite you to ask questions while we're going along. I'm remembering of questions that I have myself or that people ask about intermittent fasting. Professor, you mentioned the pathways that are involved. Maybe you would like to go into what happens while we're fasting and give us a bit of an overview of
Yeah,
what the changes are going on in our body during that time.
yeah. So in the first 2 hours, yeah, but also depends on your last meal. But in the first 2 hours, one would utilize the energy via a process called glycolysis, which is basically utilization of the sugars, the glucose, um, and then as soon as that finishes, then there is glycogen, which is the storage of glucose, which we have uh, like sort of a couple of hours, depending on, again, to the exercise and
So
the
you
activity
exercise
of
more,
the
you have less
individual.
glycogen available for. So it would be a good
Exactly.
idea to walk while you are fasting as well, because you use up your glycogen
Very
more
quickly.
quickly
That's true.
and to
That's
go
true.
then more directly to the fat, which is what
Exactly.
most
Exactly.
people are interested in.
Yes. And all this happens through chemical reactions. Okay. So there's a series of a process of chemical reactions, which eventually drives really a wheel. Okay. Because I say this because actually it is a wheel
Mm-hmm.
that turns. It is a cycle, okay, of chemicals that change in the cells. And during that cycle, they emit specific molecules that provide the energy for the cell. Okay? Now, that's the normal way, all right? As I said before, even an amino acids from proteins can also drive the use of glucose into this particular wheel. But excessive use of this would result in all the problems that we mentioned before in terms of reactive oxygen species, inflammation, and like that. Now, when the glycogen stores finish, okay, and therefore you're still under fasting conditions, which as I put the 12 hours as a mark, okay, then the visceral fat deposits, yeah, the fat is being lysed, okay. That you start using the fat as an energy source. That energy source is a little bit different. The process is different because um, um, it produces, rather than going into this wheel, the cycle of energy and whatever, then it goes into what we call ketosis, which produce ketones, and that is the energy source for the cells to produce the energy. Um, in that process, you also produce cholesterol. So one will find out that during the 2 months of fasting, it's possible that they spike the cholesterol. So don't be afraid that you spike the cholesterol. That's normal during a fasting.
And it
So you
is
can have an
reversible
increase in.
once. Mm. And it would be reversible once the fasting period
It is
is
totally reversible.
concluded.
Yes, it's
Hmm.
totally reversible. It's basically a byproduct of the fasting. And that's why
Hmm.
before we said it's important to fast for like 2 months. Yeah. And then you go to a healthy diet. And then you can also, again, utilize the fasting.
Yes.
So basically, it is a metabolic shift from one energy source to the other. And even the energy is produced by different molecules. One from ketones, the intermittent fasting, and the other one from
The
the
glycogen.
cycle that we utilize as energy
Yes.
source.
For those who have not heard about visceral fat, it is the fat that is around our organs, and it is in a normal amount. It is beneficial because it contains it stores our vitamins, and it also helps with our hormones. But if we have too much of it, it will damage our organs, namely our pancreas and our liver and our our kidneys, and it will end up, if we have too much and we do not tackle it, it will end up in health problems like diabetes, high blood pressure, and cholesterol. So this is why fasting, apart from all the other things, has such a beneficial effect. Now, we mentioned certain, I think you had mentioned at the beginning, certain supplements or things that we can take while we are fasting that might help in the fasting process as well.
I mean, there are some supplements that cannot be taken, or one has to pay attention to them. So those that would have iron, for instance, is important to use those during the eating period. All right. And in terms of like vitamins, which are oil miscible, definitely
You need to
don't
take
take
them
those
with your
during the fasting
meals.
because you're basically just throwing them away.
Yes, they keep on going without being absorbed.
Exactly. So one has to pay attention to these specific supplementation that we should not take during fasting because otherwise you don't absorb them.
Yes, you would be under the impression that you are getting the benefit, and the reality they wouldn't be having their effect because they're not being absorbed.
But one
Yeah.
additional thing,
Mhm.
so the sort of to point out, I am very interested in the microbiota. Okay, so actually, intermittent fasting, another
Yes.
advantage of
Yes, in
intermittent
fact, we didn't
fasting.
cover that. Uh-huh.
Yeah, we cover it, like, no problem. So the
Yes,
other
yes.
aspect of intermittent fasting is actually you increase the diversity of the microbiota, which is extremely important. And it's very logic. So it's important that during fasting, you're increasing the diversity. Basically, the bad bacteria are going down, so they cannot take over anymore. So in general, if there is an increase
So you
in
basically kill them off
proteobacteria,
while you are fasting.
exactly, because they love sugars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we are removing those sugars for 16 hours, for instance. Okay, so now that is providing the opportunity. It's actually opportunity to beneficial bacteria to thrive and grow. All right, and actually we see that there is an increased benefit to the diversity of the microbiota in terms of health promoting microbiota. In particularly some gut health microbiota, such as Akkermansia, because that we don't have probiotics for this. We don't have anything that we can do
So we have to
except
grow it ourselves. We need
we
to grow
have
it
to
ourselves.
exactly. The only way to, let's say, cultivate this nice garden would be to have intermittent fasting and some specific supplementations to help these specific health promoting bacteria to grow. Okay.
It's interesting.
Uh,
So the fasting not only benefits us because it affects our mitochondria and how they work, but it also affects our gut bacteria by basically sieging the bad ones until they die and they are replaced by the good bacteria. In fact, there's a lot of research going on um, uh, about gut health and about the microbiome, which are the bacteria which are living in our body, mainly our gut, but not only, and their effect on our health. And it's fascinating to see how we can help these bacteria because without them, we are in trouble. There are a lot of
of
health
course.
problems that are related to our microbiome. And as time goes by, we always discover new health issues that might have a direct cause in our gut. In fact, you can mention a few. It's a whole
Yeah,
list
there's a
of
lot. There's a
problems that
lot.
can be
This will
related
take
to our
about
gut.
3 hours, but we only take
Yes.
1 minute. Um, just giving an example, like there is 8 key vitamins. Okay, 8 key vitamins which we are not capable to produce as human cells, and they are produced by specific bacteria. And if there is this a dysbiosis, a disbalance in this bacteria, we have deficiency of these vitamins. And we're talking about folate, niacin. Okay, so very important.
Mhm.
Vitamin K2, and that's extremely important for bone
Yeah, they're
formation.
essential vitamins for us to live in a healthy way.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's important to have, and all this would result in always resolving inflammation of the intestines.
Mm-hmm.
So intermittent fasting helps in resolving it, changing the biodiversity, important in actually increasing the metabolic scenario that we have, because a lot of metabolic enzymes are provided by bacteria as well, and reducing the inflammation of the intestines altogether. So,
Very interesting. So I thank you, Professor Greg, for this very interesting session about intermittent fasting. For those of you who would like to learn more about gut health and about our microbiome and our gut bacteria and how to improve the condition of our gut, Professor Greg holds regular sessions every month about different topics that affect our gut. Maybe you'd like to share some more information for those who are interested to follow.
yes, so every month we choose a topic. In general, we look at the awareness month. So last in April we discussed in irritable bowel syndrome. This month our topic is mental health. It is also related to microbiota. Um, and um, and what we do is we have 4 sessions. They are repetitions, okay? And these
But they are always
repetitions
live
are all,
sessions, so
they're all live.
they can ask questions and
Exactly.
participate as well.
Okay, so all, yeah, that's right, that's right. All repetitions are live. And we also have guest speakers sometimes. We had Antonella with us last month, and we
And
have
this month there are
other
there
guest
are
speakers this
specialists
month
on mental health,
on mental
exactly.
health.
So I thank you very much. I will be posting the link to the seminars on the Facebook group as well. So those of you who are interested can log in and register um, uh, for the eventual sessions that are going to be held in May and in the coming months. Thank you, Professor Greg, for being with us.
Thank you for the
And
invitation.
I
It
wish
was a
you
pleasure.
all a good weekend. Thank you very much.